Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm Aviva Arendine, Director of the Hamilton Project at the Brookings Institution. The Hamilton Project is a nonpartisan organization that puts forward analysis and policy proposals to support broad-based economic growth. As we all know, we're already experiencing rapid growth of artificial intelligence in and out of the workplace. Earlier this week, the Hamilton Project released an essay from Daron Acemoglu, David Autor, and Simon Johnson, all of MIT, entitled Building Pro-Worker AI. The essay defines pro-worker AI as technology that makes human skills and expertise more rather than less valuable. It also argues that the market is investing in the development of pro-worker AI and that policy interventions can help. I'm delighted to introduce Natasha Sarin, who in just a moment will moderate a conversation with David, Daron, and Simon, digging into the important concept of pro-worker AI and exploring whether it's feasible for policy to increase investment and innovation in these technologies. Natasha is a professor at Yale Law School, the president and co-founder of the Budget Lab at Yale, and a member of the Hamilton Project's Advisory Council. To ask questions during the event, you can send us an email at info@hamiltonproject.org or follow us on X at HamiltonProj and use the hashtag AI+work. Natasha, I'll turn things over to you to introduce our panel.
Great. Thanks so much, Aviva, and thanks to all of you for joining us. I suspect many of you here today, have been thinking a lot about AI and its impact on the labor market, and I'm delighted that we have a chance to learn from three luminaries in Daron, David, and Simon, who just released this really interesting piece for Hamilton that Aviva was referring to. We have about an hour together this afternoon, and I have a million questions, and Aviva and Melanie shared so many thoughtful questions from the audience today. So what I agreed with our authors to do is to spend about 10 or 15 minutes up top laying out some of the core arguments in the paper, because there really is a lot here, and then using that as kind of a launch pad for our conversation and more of a dialogue as a group. And I'd like to invite David, Daron, and Simon to turn on their cameras now. And I think we're going to start with David, who is going to talk us through the team's conceptual framework and kind of define for us exactly what it is to have a pro-worker AI. So David, take it away.
I'm actually going to turn it over to my AI, Daron Acemoglu, who will start us off.
We're going to do a joint presentation. Thanks, Natasha. Thanks, Aviva. It's our pleasure to be here. 52% of American workers are worried about AI, but this isn't a fear of the unknown. 42% of those currently using AI think that it will lead to job loss, compared to only 30% among those who are not using AI. Americans are right to be worried, because AI is presented as the greatest automation technology of all time, AGI, artificial general intelligence, being the apogee of this vision. Automation can increase productivity, but it has a number of adverse effects on workers who may suffer earnings losses, displacement, and the inequality between capital and labor can worsen. This paper is arguing that there is a different pro-worker direction of AI. We define pro-worker AI as technology, we define pro-worker technologies as those that expand human capabilities and make workers' skills and expertise more valuable. Pro-worker AI is AI that serves this purpose. Let us unpack this definition a little bit, and to do that, we need to first talk about tasks. Tasks are the constituent units of production, what you need to do in order to deliver a good or a service. So for example, for textile production, you need to start with spinning, and then weaving according to some design, finishing, dyeing, and a whole range of other marketing and white-collar tasks in order for that good to be able to be delivered to consumers. A key question for firms is how to perform different tasks, which factors to allocate them to, which combination of factors. Labor often performs different tasks using broad skills, for example, analytical knowledge or physical strength, but also expertise, which is acquired knowledge for performing those tasks. So for example, a welder requires hand-eye coordination and physical strength, but also needs a lot of expertise about new machinery and the production process. And it is part of the reason why welders in Ford factories used to be paid the equivalent of more than $40 an hour, expertise is often quite critical for workers to have good, well-paying, good jobs. Now, the key is that we need to understand technology within the context of how it reallocates tasks and how it makes task production more productive. For that reason, it is useful to distinguish 5 different types of technological changes, but there are more, but those are good enough for us to get started, because the classic approach in economics that treats the production process as a black box sort of assumes that technology has uniform effects, but there are many different types of technologies. What we call labor augmenting technologies, what economists call labor augmenting technologies, correspond to things that make labor more productive in the tasks that are already assigned to it. So, for example, better hammers and better tools would make workers working in construction more productive. That will increase productivity, no doubt. For example, the same worker with now better tools can perform the same tasks as 2 workers were able to do before. But it has ambiguous effects on a number of things that workers care about. For example, labor share may not increase and may in fact decrease. But more importantly, as fewer workers are necessary to perform the same amount of tasks, the price of those tasks can go down, and the expertise that workers had, for example, for advanced building trades, those are going to be devalued as well. In other words, there isn't a natural win-win situation for labor from labor augmenting technologies. Capital augmenting technologies are similar, but much more central to today's discussions, and AI as an automation tool, is that there are many important automation technologies. For example, the Industrial Revolution was all about automation technologies in the textile industry, as I mentioned before. Robots for welding were one of the very important advances that rationalized the manufacturing process, but they were decidedly mixed news for workers. Many welders lost their jobs and the premiums that they enjoyed as a result of that. In general, automation technologies displace workers. They always reduce the labor share of production because capital is being substituted for tasks previously performed by labor. They may increase or reduce wages. There is no law of economics that says automation should be bad for workers in the absolute, but there is a distinct possibility that so many of them are displaced from the tasks that they perform that actually wages can even go down. And it commodifies expertise because even more so than labor augmenting technologies, it's making that expertise unnecessary. So for welders, all of that expertise that they had gained in specific industries became worthless once robots started performing those tasks. It can increase productivity. Obviously, that's the reason why firms are adopting, but automation can take the form of so-so automation, a little bit of productivity improvement, but a lot of task displacement. So it's decidedly a mixed bag for workers. So definitely not our definition of pro-worker technology. Instead, what we think pro-worker technologies do is that they create new tasks, new opportunities for workers to work alongside tools, make their expertise more valuable, gain new expertise, and those sorts of things reinstate labor rather than displacing it. In particular, this kind of reinstatement is very important because if we live under some ideal conditions, even the welders that lose their jobs as a result of automation may find jobs, but these wouldn't be new work. It would be jobs that, for example, lower paid workers used to do before. But with new task creating technologies, you have a whole host of new possibilities. That's the reason why, for example, a lot of advanced machinery starting in the beginning of the 20th century and accelerating in the first 4 decades of the post-war era led to a lot of new high-paying jobs. New machines required operators, technicians, supervisors, and so on. It is these sorts of things that are critical for good jobs and for labor to take its share of production. Now, some other technologies can also play a mixed role in this regard. We call them expertise leveling technologies. If you think of the GPS-based navigation tools, what they do is that they enable drivers that previously couldn't deal with complex roads, such as those in London, do a better job here. But this is not a new task because workers with greater expertise, for example, black cab drivers, were able to do that before. And this sort of enables the less experienced workers to take over some of these tasks. So the value of expertise here is mixed, and this is an ambiguous kind of technology when it comes to pro-worker direction. Now, our whole shtick in this paper is that AI has tremendous potential to create new tasks, new ways of making new expertise, and workers collaborate with machinery. We are not the first to make this point. Many pioneers of computer science foresaw this possibility 60, 70 years ago. But importantly, this is not the direction that AI is going. And that's why building pro-worker artificial intelligence, in fact, building pro-manual worker artificial intelligence is a possibility, is socially beneficial, and is technically quite feasible, as David is going to explain next.
Thanks very much, Daron. So let me set the scene by giving a kind of a hypothetical example that kind of illustrates these cases, and then I'll turn to some real examples. And what we want to emphasize is that, the same technology can be used in many different ways to tackle a problem. And some of those ways are really collaborative with workers and some are automating workers. So let's take the example of aviation maintenance. There's 161,000 aircraft maintenance technicians in the United States, and they make a median pay of about $80,000 a year. Federally certified as skilled vocational work. Airlines have a strong incentive to do this work reliably and cost effectively. It's kind of a life and death activity, and also affects the efficiency of their operation. So imagine three hypothetical tools that could be produced for aviation maintenance technicians. One is what you might call the aviation maintenance automator. It makes the work so simple that any high school kid with a screwdriver could do the job, right? So they're just the eyes and hands of the machine. Well, this is not, in our view, pro-worker. Right? You might actually end up hiring lots of people to do it, but there will be no expertise involved. They'll never make high pay because it'll be a commodity. If anyone can do it, it's just not going to pay well. And so that's just the person is, the last mile doing what the machine says. Imagine another version of this, what we're going to call the AMT assistant. The technician remains the expert decision maker, but AI extends their diagnostic and repair capabilities, handles paperwork, supports training via flight simulator-like features. And this is really much more pro-worker in the sense that it takes the expertise of that technician and leverages it, extends it to allow them to do a broader set of tasks, solve harder problems, do more reliable work, use their judgment, but go further with it. This is pretty pro-worker, but you can see it's a mixed bag. It's also going to create new competition between junior and senior technicians. So some people will like it, and some people will be unhappy that it kind of degrades the value of seniority potentially. A third application would be what we call the AMT liftoff, which basically helps aircraft maintenance technicians transition their skills into the spaceflight sector, which is very rapidly growing, requires a whole new set of skills and training, and potentially, there's a lot of opportunity there. Now, in the long run, of course, there will be experienced space technicians, and then, this technology will also create competition with them. But the point we want to make is these are the same occupations, the same underlying goal, but these tools have radically different implications for workers, and the design choices matter. A pro-worker technology is emphatically not a technology that enables anyone to do anything without any training. That's completely says there's no expertise required. The practical test for us is, does the technology make human skills and expertise more useful rather than less necessary? We want to emphasize, not all these things are within easy reach. Automation is overpromised and underdelivered. Automation is actually quite difficult to do because it requires saying, hey, you don't need to understand a thing. The machine has got this. You're just along for the ride. Most professional tasks, including skilled repair and so on, require the use of judgment in combination with technical know-how. And technology is well suited to support that. It usually is not well suited to displace the worker. It collaborates with their expertise. It doesn't necessarily eliminate it. So just to give you a couple of quick examples, one is from a company called Schneider Electric. They're a global electrical services firms. They do a lot of commercial installation repair, and they have field technicians. So they send out field engineers to do on-site diagnosis and repair. And those people have tons of training, tons of skills, some have PhDs. But what they don't have is real-time field support of the depth of the database and the kind of back end of Schneider's whole knowledge enterprise. So they came up with a tool that allows field technicians to upload photos, diagnostic data, and field notes. The AI will match that with databases and provide real-time guidance, access to plans, access to repair manuals and recommend steps, advise regulatory compliance, translate reports. So again, this is an enabling technology. It allows these technicians to leverage their expertise to go further once they get to a job site. In another example is the US Patent Office, right? Patent examiners could spend half a day or a full day just like doing old style Boolean searches, author, last name, date of release, just to figure out what prior art was relevant when making a determination if a patent was novel or not novel. Now, the Patent Office uses a tool, an AI tool called More Like This, that allows conceptual matching of patents according to substance and category. It's not based on just using the same words, same date, same author, and allows the patent examiner to focus more on the judgmental task of evaluating what's novel, rather than the paperwork task of looking for what else has been written. So in the best case, right, this allows them to leverage their expertise by displacing the supporting tasks and focusing on the expert tasks, and potentially this can make this a better remunerated, more specialized job. The last example I'll give is actually from a recent paper by Chen et al. I was surprised to learn this. China has approximately 200 million gig workers by the estimates of The Economist magazine. That's more workers than the US has workers. A non-trivial number of them, as you would expect, have some type of physical limitation. One of those physical limitations might be hearing impairments. And that's actually a really big problem for a gig worker in China, because you're expected to make a phone call to the customer's house when you arrive, and they will say, here's where the gate is, here's the code, here's how I'm going to find you, but it's expected to call. Well, if you have a hearing impairment, that's very difficult to do. So this app had, the developers had the idea to say, well, hey, why don't we have a little speech to text, text to speech thing? You type in what you want, it will say that to the customer. When the customer speaks, we'll translate back to text for you in real time. This had the effect, it was prosaic, but it was transformative. It closed the customer review gap between hearing impaired and not hearing impaired workers, and opened a performance gap where the hearing impaired workers actually performed better. Why did they perform better? They were more experienced. They were more dedicated to this platform because they had fewer outside options. So to close, these examples span the skilled trades, white-collar government work, low-wage gig work. Pro-worker AIs, it's not a niche concept just for high-tech jobs. In fact, we suspect it has even more potential in non-degreed work that have been historically underserved by technology. There's much opportunity here. So the question is not whether this is technically feasible. These tools exist today. The example of that hearing assistance program, right? That uses technology that's been in Siri for 15 years. The question is, why isn't the market producing more of them, and should it be? And that's the question that we turn to next with Simon Johnson.
Thank you, David. Thanks very much, Natasha and everyone at the Hamilton Project for this opportunity. And we're really looking forward to the discussion and the ideas that other people have around policies. But just to lay out a few of our own ideas and our own proposals, what Daron and David have told you is that the key elements of pro-worker AI are twofold. One is the creation of new tasks, things that humans haven't done before. But those new tasks have to involve and require and value human expertise. So we have three categories of ideas, I would say, that get at this. And really, we're very open to other suggestions. I think, Natasha, one of the things that has puzzled us the most in this space is many people share our concerns, but they throw up their hands and say, oh, there's nothing you could possibly do. Technology is inevitable. You just have to sit back and it happens to you. Well, no, actually not. Historically, there's plenty of choices. And if you look, just start, for example, with healthcare and education, these are sectors that are tremendously important in this economy and many economies. The US federal government and state and local are really important players. They spend a lot of money. They procure things, they spend. These are specific sectors which we would emphasize, and we do make some suggestions directly about this in the paper, as places where the government can say, we want to have pro-worker AI, we want to enhance human capabilities, we want to provide better services, obviously. And these are places where we can experiment, these are places where we can lead, these are places where we can have big demonstration effects. And more broadly, government, building AI expertise in government. Obviously, you can do this at the federal level. Perhaps there have been some attempts in this direction, but also state and local. I would say, Natasha, these are places, people we know and people we work with who are really interested in thinking about how can we use AI? How can we use AI in a way that is not just let's automate, let's replace workers, let's supposedly attempt to reduce costs, but let's try to be more creative. Let's come up with new things that we can do. And while we're at it, let's talk about grant making. And obviously, historically, and hopefully going forward, the US government has been really important, the federal government in particular, in terms of directing investments through the NSF, National Institutes of Health, Department of Defense, Energy and Agriculture, and so on. So these grant processes could explicitly and directly ask for efforts that would be attempting to develop exactly pro-worker AI. And you can use that terminology, or you can invent your own terminology, but it has to have new tasks, and new tasks have to value human expertise in order for it to count. We do emphasize you need to have competition. You need to have competition in both what the government does, and we talk about some specifics, and we're looking for competition within the private sector. I don't think this is, well, we're certainly not saying anyone can pick a winner and just back that winner and you've solved the problem. Not at all. We do think, this is in this sort of second category of our proposals, that the tax code needs to be re-examined, Natasha, and you're the perfect person to discuss that with. We think the tax code has been, for a variety of good and bad reasons, it has come to favor excessively the adoption of algorithms over the promotion and development of human expertise in human tasks. And we think that can be redressed. We understand there are revenue considerations as well, but changing that asymmetry in the tax code, Natasha, is really important. And then there's a third category of ideas that I would call creating new markets and new activities around worker voice, around worker ownership of expertise, ownership of data, for example. And there's a lot that can be done here. Now, we've only sketched out some of this in our paper. We're very, very interested to hear from other people on this. But I think the idea that you can sort of sit back and technology is just going to wipe out jobs, nothing you do about it, that can't be true. And that's not been experienced in some episodes historically. And at the same time, I would stress, I think we would all stress, we're not anti-technology. We're not trying to prevent AI from being adopted. We know that it's coming. We do think the direction of technology can be changed. We do think that choices can be made. And the last proposal we made is an important one. And it's not last because it's the least, which is addressing barriers caused by licenses in various professions. Because if we're going to be expanding human capabilities, for example, in the medical profession for nurse practitioners or technicians, they have to be allowed to do more, perhaps, than they've been allowed to do before. So this is absolutely about breaking down barriers and expanding human opportunity. But we want to emphasize, Natasha, throughout that it's opportunity for all humans at all skill levels, irrespective of education or background. That should be the goal, Natasha. And this technology, if seen through that lens, can be immensely empowering and helpful. But we fear, well, in fact, in the paper, I'd say we emphasize that the path we're currently on is not that path. We are not currently on the pro-worker AI path. And that's unfortunate, it's regrettable, it's avoidable, and we're working pretty hard to try and get us onto another path, a much more pro-worker path. Thank you.
So this is also great, and there's so much here that really speaks to me, but I promised the authors that I would sort of view my role as a moderator as playing a bit of devil's advocate in this conversation. And so in doing so, one of the things that seems hard to me about pro-worker AI, and Simon, you started to gesture at this as you were talking about policy and particularly historical examples, is it just seems to me to be somewhat amorphous and hard for a policymaker in kind of like real time to evaluate whether developments are pro-worker or anti-worker or pro-some workers. And so I wonder if you all can speak a little bit to the historical context, and provide some examples for the audience of when you think government has successfully shaped the contours of technological progress. And relatedly, I mean, one version of answering that question maybe is a counterfactual, which is if you all had kind of been in charge at the outset of the Industrial Revolution or computerization and the Internet Revolution, these like major periods of tectonic technological progress that really changed the way all of us work, what would you have done differently? And what are the paths not pursued that would have been more pro-worker in those moments?
All right, Daron, that's one of your favorite topics of all time. You want to take that?
I'll have a first go. Like the way I would like to answer that question is like in two stages. Yes, pro-worker AI needs to be more clearly measured and delineated in order to become a metric, if that's going to be the metric that's enforced. But many things that we aspire to do are also amorphous. So, right now, the whole Silicon Valley ecosystem is burning with the desire to beat China. That's also amorphous. What does that mean? So I think the question is changing the priorities of researchers. If tomorrow we woke up and 50% of the considerable talent that's working on AI right now decided that instead of automating everything and instead of running after AGI, we should use AI to create better tools, better information for problem solving and decision making for workers and for humans to collaborate with AI, we would soon get pro-worker AI. So the question is, how can you change that dynamic within the sector? And some of the tools that Simon suggested were exactly about that. Those are imperfect tools. There is no magic bullet. But just this conversation, just putting on the table that pure automation has a variety of adverse social consequences, and an accelerated form of it may very much endanger our democracy, and that there is an alternative that's technically feasible and socially desirable, I think that's a big change already. And if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, we lived through exactly the same kinds of things. The big disruptions in the Industrial Revolution, for example, came from a very, very rapid process of trying to mechanize weaving, for example, which led to a more than 2/3 drop in the wages of weavers, horrible conditions in weaving factories. When there were other alternatives that could have been done much more slowly, and much more effort could have been put in improving other technologies, which later were done in the second phase. Institutional changes, democracy, the Chartist movement played a role there. Union movement played a role. The fact that the direction of technology and priorities change in new industries played a role. I think we don't need to repeat those mistakes, but it is absolutely true, and I agree with you, Natasha, that if you put all of the onus on the government, only the government has to steer us in that direction. I don't think that's going to work. It needs to be a collective effort.
I got three things for you, Natasha. The Department of Defense self-driving vehicle grand challenge, with a prize money of, drum roll please, $1 million, got an entire industry jump-started, right? So we're all right. We like grand challenges. Let's do grand challenge for pro-worker AI. Hey, $1 million, whatever it takes. Second, digital advertising, Natasha. Digital advertising and social media. The creation of the attention economy was a deliberate government policy that has brought us all kinds of trouble. And the idea that you'll fix this later, we'll let social media do what it wants and then we'll sort it out later. Well, that doesn't work. And the third thing is the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, Natasha. I mean, that was a government policy. That was a decision. And maybe we could have done some things differently about the early Industrial Revolution. Yes, I agree with Daron on that. But we've learned a lot since over the past 250 years. And we have a government that has much more, well, capability, but also authority and ability to act. And these are all activities that fall within the legislative regulated sphere one way or another. And we're not about stopping technology. We're about pulling it in this more pro-worker direction.
But I guess you're not about stopping technology, but on some level, you are a little bit about slowing technological progress in order to advance the aims of pro-worker AI. And so particularly this but let me just say one sentence about why I think that might be the case, and you all can react to it. And it has to do with it. You talked a little bit about Uber in the paper, and you also were talking about self-driving cars just now, Simon. The Uber example I thought was pretty memorable and helpful in the paper because, as you point out, ride-hailing apps opened up driving to millions of new entrants, but it also commodified the expertise of the incumbents. And so I guess, how should we evaluate technologies that are great for some workers but bad for others? And at what point does a mixed bag technology like that count as pro-worker? And, to take it to the next sort of iteration of this, Waymo isn't pro-worker by your definition, I don't think, because it could mean the end of the road for those drivers of ride-hailing apps presently. But it's really good for those workers in the economy who have safer commutes and more efficient commutes and the like. And so isn't that pro-worker? Like, why do some workers count in your calculus more or differently than others?
All right, this is David's prime topic. Go ahead, Dave.
So, I mean, I think we many points that you're discussing, these are great points. First of all, where this is a complicated mixed bag, right? There's, we're not against automation. Automation has many benefits, and the speed of change matters a great deal. Of course, that's something we've learned over and over. We learned that during the China trade shock. We learned that during the Industrial Revolution, that the rate of labor market adjustment isn't nearly as fast as the rate that technologies can change. But we are not advocating for slowing things down. It's a question of which direction we're pushing in, right? Like think of, self-driving cars, another great example, right? Say, oh, look, AI drives cars, right? AI, that's been the year, that's 2 decades of a multi-trillion-dollar investment to get AI to drive cars, right? It didn't wake up out of the box one morning and start doing that, right? That was a choice of what to prioritize. If you want to run a surveillance state with, real-time content moderation of everything that anyone says, that's a huge investment. Some countries have done that successfully, right? So AI, what we use AI for is not just what Claude says at the prompt. It's what we choose, what capacities we choose to build out. And we have lots of problems right now that need enhancement that are not subject to automation. Automation is hard. We're going to have doctors and nurses 20 years from now, even if we have, quote, AGI, right? The question is, will we use it to make them more effective and to enable more people to do that work well? So if you say, well, what is a metric of pro-worker AI? Well, in my opinion, one thing you look at is, does it enable people without as much elite education to do high-value services, to do healthcare delivery, to do paralegal services, to do software, to do kitchen design, contracting, skilled repair, right? Does it enable people to take some expertise that they've mastered and apply it to a more valuable set of problems? And that doesn't, now we recognize that not pro-worker doesn't always mean pro everyone else, right? Some things that are pro-consumer and not pro-worker, right? Amazon is pro-consumer. It's not pro-worker, right? And that's the way of the world. We're not saying you can only have this one thing, but I think all of us have a collective interest in the functioning of the labor market, right? The labor market, I would argue, is our most important social institution. It is the foundation of democracy. The notion that most people are both claimants on society and contributors to society. If we didn't have a well-functioning labor market, it would be hard for us to have a representative government if all the resources were, not accruing to so many workers. So we want it to function well. It's not, yes, so let me stop there. So I think, it's not the only factor, but it's something we want to give weight to. Go ahead, Simon.
Okay, yeah, I have 3 things to add to that. First of all, let's be careful with this word progress, Natasha. And technological progress is a little bit leading the witness. Technological change might be a better, more neutral term. And whether or not you actually get progress from technology is something we've also addressed. And I know we're here to promote a 50-page Hamilton paper, which is a serious academic paper, and you should definitely read that. But if you're a little bit tired and we're going to read something a little bit lighter, or you have a 13-year-old in your house, we have a 10-page or 20-page mini comic, which is actually by Daron and me, but there's a lot of David in here too, called Power, which is about our power and progress. And the question, Tasha, is when does technological change deliver broadly shared prosperity, or what can be reasonably considered to be progress in any shared form? And on the Waymo example, which I think is a brilliant and really timely example, as we talk about in the paper, when Uber and other similar services replace taxis, bad news for taxi medallion owners, bad news for some taxi drivers. A lot of new people enter into the urban chauffeur business. Relative wages in that sector don't change very much. And there's maybe 1 or 1.5 million people who drive for Uber today. Waymo is completely different. Waymo is an automation technology. It replaces human drivers. There are some jobs supporting Waymo, people who do tech support. Most of those people, Natasha, to our understanding, are not in the United States. And people who close Waymo doors when they're left open by the passengers, I don't think those jobs come with health insurance or 401ks. Okay, so automation, and Waymo is tremendously popular in some markets. 20% market share in San Francisco. Waymo and its competitors are present in an increasing number of U.S. cities. I think it'll be, well, we'll see how many it is this year, but they're really pressing hard. And consumers like it, Natasha, to your point. Absolutely. This is not a scam or people not feeling safe. The people like the product. But what's happening to the jobs? And you have never, ever heard us say, Natasha, I promise, I really believe you'll never heard us say, stop Waymo, slow it down. We are saying, create new tasks. You got to run faster if you want to create the new jobs and drive a demand for labor, a demand for workers and human expertise, because the automation is coming and it's coming so quickly. Daron, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. I think that's the key. But when I was saying, in some sense, we need a change of perspective as the first step, I think your question really helps for that. We are under sort of two parts of a big narrative. One is that there is an inevitability to the direction of technology, that we have no choice on the direction of technology. That's hypothesis number one that we've been told. And hypothesis number two is that, well, if there is only one direction of technology, that's progress, because then the alternative is stopping it. But if there are multiple directions in which we can go, even if you think one direction may be progress in some way, some other direction may be better, or one direction may be taking us to the abyss. Well, we're not in favor of slowing down progress. But if a car is going towards the abyss, we are in favor of steering it in a different direction. And we think that massive automation would be an abyss, because it would be the end of democracy, a hugely unequal two-tier society. If we can steer it that way without slowing it down, great. If in order to steer it that way, you need to hit the brake a little, I'll definitely be for that.
Yeah, so I guess this is a really helpful exchange for me in that, and maybe we can do one more second on Waymo and then on Amazon, as David started saying, right? Because I guess what I'm saying is you all are reacting very much to what the employees who are in the business of driving ride-hailing apps, or the employees at Amazon. And what I'm saying is, and you're talking about consumers as this different bucket of people, but consumers are also workers, just in different sectors of the economy than those ones. And so maybe another way to phrase the question, and this is a question from the audience, is like over longer time spans, a lot of the automation that we've been discussing so far this afternoon has been like a really significant engine of human prosperity. And so it's definitely painful for the transition moments are incredibly painful for those workers who are in sectors where their jobs are displaced. But the aggregate effect of and leading the witness law professor critique I take very deeply, the aggregate effect of that technological change has been to make societies richer, and that is good, I think, for the individuals who live in those societies and the workers who live in those societies. It just depends on the time horizon at which you're looking at the question. And so maybe like a way to ask this of you all is like, what is your time horizon that you have in mind in order to evaluate what type of policies strike you as pro-worker or not pro-worker? Are we focused on people in the jobs that they currently inhabit in the economy as it sits today? Or are you taking a bit of a longer term view, and does that lead you to different outcomes?
So I would actually like to answer the first part of your question again, because you've again made a number of suppositions in the question, which I disagree with. So you've assumed that automation in the past automatically created new jobs and a lot of prosperity. Indeed, the United States had 50% of its population or labor force work in agriculture. Now that's down to 3%. And there are a lot of new work that was created in the process. David and his co-authors, for example, show that 2/3 of the jobs that people perform today did not really exist, and not in their current form, 60 years ago. So is that the market process? If the agricultural workers were displaced, half of the population, and then they were thrown into the economy and they all became construction workers, would that have worked out as well? No, it would not have worked out as well. It would have pressed down construction wages, and capital's share would go through the roof, and wages would actually probably fall. What was critical was at the same time, new technologies and new organizations created a lot of new work. in manufacturing, new industries, in both manufacturing and services, and new clerical work. None of that was automatic. It required both entrepreneurship and also new technologies to be developed. And I think in history, sometimes that has happened, but it's not. It would be a mistake to assume that it's automatic, that every massive automation wave is going to create amazing benefits for workers.
Natasha,
That's why we're talking about using AI to create that kind of new work.
Two historical data points, Natasha. Mechanization of the textile industry, the cotton industry in the UK starts in the 1770s with spinning, which does actually create some more opportunities for weavers, but then mechanization spreads to weaving. Real wages for textile workers in Manchester, in Lancashire, in fact, most of the UK did not really move between the 1780s and the 1830s. The huge fortunes were made. The entrepreneurs in those businesses became some of the richest people in the world. But there was no gain in real wages until railways arrived. It created new tasks for humans. So that's a pretty big lag, Natasha. A lot of automation, 50 years, no movement of real wages. But that's a long time ago. What about the 1980s and subsequently in digital transformations? Well, there we've had a lot of automation. Daron and David spent many, many years measuring that and showing the effects of this, with an interaction with globalization, of course. And what's happened there, as you know, is that while some headline growth numbers may look respectable, we've had this massive bifurcation of the labor market and a crushing of the middle skills, middle education, middle America has been pushed down to the lower end of the labor market in the United States, where it's very hard to survive, while some high-skilled people have done, as you know, extremely well. Now, that's not a recent development. That's 40 or 50 years. And if it's the case, as we fear, but we don't think it has to be this way, but if it's the case that AI is proves to be a reinforcement primarily of that digital transformation that's already established, Natasha, then we're not talking about a 40 or 50-year pause or crushing of the middle in America, and the social and political consequence of that, of course, which are pretty darned obvious to everybody, but a continuation and an intensification of that polarization of the labor market. I don't think that's a world that most of us are going to enjoy living in.
If I can add just 1 minute, take another example. It's always, people don't like talking about, stopping technology, stopping progress, right? They always think that, it's a win-win in the long run. It's a manna from heaven. Think about the China trade shock of 20 years ago, right? That was just like technological progress. It lowered prices. It was very pro-consumer in many ways. It also was crushing for manufacturing intensive communities and was scarring for the workers who did that. Those communities have now started to recover 20 years later, but not the people who were doing those jobs. Completely different set of people. Now, I don't think anyone at this point wants to argue that's just the best possible way we could have done that. We could not have done any better than the way we handled that, right? That was poor policy. We had nothing in place to support that transition, nothing in place to help those communities reallocate, nothing in place to help workers move into new activities, and nothing to create something better in its stead. So it's not, should we have traded with China? Yeah, I think so. Lowered prices. Could we have handled it differently? Could we have affected the pace and put in support programs to support that transition more effectively? I think so. So I don't think it's one or the other.
So I very much agree with that, David, and I do want to dig into a little bit like what is the policy response, and is what you all have in mind a version of like strengthen the social safety net, reform the tax code, or something beyond that. So like I think that's an important set of issues you raise. I want to spend just a second though, and this is another sort of question from the audience, digging into like exactly, before we get to like what are the policy tools, like exactly what market failures we're trying to correct here. One of the sort of sentences that this audience member raised from the paper is, you say that leading firms perceive greater return to building and deploying expertise than those that create new tasks for workers and increase the value of skill and expertise. And so I guess one question is like, is that a statement about the past? It feels like the value of expertise in firms has really increased in recent history, not decreased. Or is it a statement about how you view or have measured, have some estimates for how investments are being made today by some of these leading AI firms? And I guess a related question to all of you is, to what extent do you think that there's some tension here with a pro-worker AI stance and doing what is ultimately productivity and profit maximizing from the firm's perspective? Because if these set of policies are sort of profit maximizing, like then the question is like, why do you need any interventions? Like, why aren't the firms just doing pro-worker AI themselves?
Should I take this one or? Thanks, Natasha. That's very, very important. I think the market is great in allocating apples and oranges, but doesn't always work very well when there is monopoly and when there are external effects, meaning that what the market does affects a whole host of other actors. So what Standard Oil did was very profit maximizing, cornering the market, excluding all the competitors. But I don't think many people would argue it was great for American society. Thank God it was broken up. So the question is, when it comes to innovation activities, especially the innovation direction, is the profit maximizing always the one that's also good for society? And I think there are a number of reasons why that wouldn't be the case. Many large companies have their own ecosystem and business model. And right now, AI is being led by companies that have a business model around selling automation tools and making money from digital advertisement. And that's the business model around which they're developing AI. None of these companies have specialized in creating pro-worker technologies, which are very difficult to monetize in some situations, because oftentimes they're going to be developed and new expertise acquired by workers would be the ones that get some of the benefits. Moreover, I think in many situations, the competitive process that would actually bring these sorts of things against the existing business models is pretty much hampered by the fact that it's a very concentrated industry. AI requires a lot of resources. And if you start as a startup, if you're promising, you're probably going to be bought up by one of the established players. So that's a very, very sort of restricted market. And that's the reason why I actually don't even think that the trade-off is between productivity and social good. As David also already hinted at, automation is difficult business, especially when you're trying to automate whole occupations. That's very, very difficult. It's going to be very slow going, and the productivity gains are going to be very much limited. For example, in recent work with Pasquale Restrepo, we estimate that productivity gains from automation, even with the very impressive robots and software systems, were actually quite small. That's because automation, even when you're dealing with tasks, is bringing only small cost savings unless it becomes really revolutionary. I think the kind of organizational changes that are required for wholesale or close to wholesale automation of tasks is going to be very difficult. So pro-worker AI, if it becomes a reality, actually could really jumpstart a different and, in my mind, very powerful productivity growth process, because you are making the human resources that are at the center of many businesses more productive. So again, I don't think the trade-off is between, progress that's going to get us a lot of productivity with some adverse distributional effects that we should live with. It's really about a different direction that could be much better, both for social outcomes and perhaps even for productivity, I would argue.
So I work in a business school, Natasha, and I spend a lot of time talking with executives, established business, and people trying to build new companies. And it's remarkable that the uniformity of vision and the power of fashion around this notion of automation. A little oppressive, I would say. Now, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, and David always makes the point quite rightly. There are people within the tech sector who've got different ideas, who've got more pro-worker ideas, to be honest. But think about what's happened to computer science and computer science graduates, Natasha. All these kids who were told since the age 4, learn to code, go to coding camp, build a video game, be a computer science major. They can't get employed now. They can't get jobs. Why? Because the fashion has shifted. The mindset in the American corporate sector has shifted towards, I don't know, Claude this week, something else that rhymes with lobster next week. I don't know. The AI taking over, but it's a mindset, Natasha. Now, are there profit-making opportunities to do something differently, to do something pro-worker? Yes, absolutely. Can the government catalyze these things and pull us towards a new vision? Yes, absolutely. That's what the British government's trying to do. That's what other governments and trade union movements and other people around the world are trying to do. It's in the US, we're a little bit too in the thrall of a couple of powerful images and maybe egos around automation, Natasha, and we need to get beyond that. And that's the point. That's the point of the paper, and that's why we're very grateful to Hamilton for letting us have this opportunity to share these views and stir the pot a little bit.
It's so interesting, and I will stir right back. I mean, two things that I'll say. One is that if you haven't seen it yet, or if the people listening haven't read it yet, Jason Furman had a great piece in the Times this morning where he makes the point that actually, like, as an industry, AI is quite competitive. It might actually there might be reasons why we're concerned that it's too competitive, because we might be barreling towards some sort of a bubble where there is like a winner take all dynamic ultimately, and not really capacity to profit maximize, or sorry, not really capacity to have significant profits by the rest of the market entrants who have kind of pushed into the industry very aggressively in order to capitalize on the potential profits to be had. The sort of second thing I'll say that's a bit pot stirring in the direction back is you all seem to be sure, or at least of the view, that these set of pro-worker AI policies might ultimately be profit maximizing, productivity maximizing, but aren't being pursued for some reason. And it's that there's some sort of ethos that is into automation, even though automation isn't profit max, but it doesn't, why would that be, right? If it actually was profit maximizing for these firms, surely they would be interested in pursuing it and not against pursuing it for a set of like amorphous reasons. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll give it back to you all, is that there actually isn't much. We've all heard kind of the vibes versions of the certain sectors are having a hard time finding jobs and young graduates and all the like, but there actually isn't much evidence for that. And I will plug Budget Lab's work on the impact of AI on the labor market thus far as kind of making that point.
Well, one small point, Daron, one small point, and then to you. Look up the Panic of 1873, Natasha. Well, you may know all about it, but your author, that is beyond the scope of this paper. But hey, you want a historical experience where people are piling in, it's massively competitive. You build railways that transform the country, if not the world, and you also manage to combine that with a lot of excess and financial panic and crisis and collapse. So
totally. That's a big concern.
Competition is not the be all and end all. Let's be quite careful about that. But Daron, you go on.
So I have not read Jason's piece. Jason's a great economist, so I'm sure he's not making the following mistake, which is to think that a winner-take-all economy or sector that generates a lot of rush is actually competitive. It's the opposite. The winner-take-all means that there will be one winner, an ultimate monopoly, an ultimate single business model, this ultimate model. That's the antithesis of competition. If people are rushing to get to that winner-take-all, that's even worse. That's a very well-established result that shows that will lead to excessive spending in order to take that monopoly position. So that's actually a very bad situation. But I let David answer the second part of that. Yeah. But I also can come back about why profit maximization may not follow if you have very, very powerful models of what new technology is about.
Yeah, we have till 9 p.m., right? So I think we're focused too narrowly on AI labs in this discussion, right? They're providing platforms that can be used in a variety of ways. But a lot of the deployment decisions are going to be, they're going to be in schools, they're going to be in businesses, they're going to be in factories, right? They're going to be in healthcare. And the question is, what are you designing for and how might you do it? Is the goal to get as much labor out as possible? Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Automation is not immoral. Sometimes you should automate. It's maybe the best, cheapest, fastest thing to do. But in many cases, these are hard problems that require human judgment. And actually, the rush to automate, I think, is a mistake. You think you can suck all the expertise out of a system and bottle it, and it turns out you actually need people who are there to translate, people who intermediate between the machine and the customer. Right? They are like the medical practitioners. They are the translators. They are the guides, and in many cases, it's actually within easy reach to make them more productive by giving them better tools. Automation is the last step of something. The intermediate step is giving people better tools to make them more effective than we do, like a stethoscope, not automation, right? But it's really great for doctors. Chainsaw, not automation, great for lumberjacks, dangerous for me, right? There are many, many ways. Most of us use tools all the time, incredibly sophisticated tools, to do our work, but that doesn't take away from our own expertise and judgment. That actually makes our expertise and judgment useful. And so many of the problems in the world are very broad. They're not closed. They don't have a simple solution. If they already had a simple solution, we'd have a computer already doing it because we know how to write those rules, right? And so we're going to need people, but we want people to do these things better. We don't want everyone to have to go to the 99th percentile doctor to get a good diagnosis. We'd like the median doctor to give a good diagnosis, right? We would like the median lawyer to represent your case well for you. We would like the median educator to be an effective educator. And so we can use tools to make people more effective. It's not a case against automation per se. It's saying that there's an opportunity here that is probably under-recognized. And we're obviously not going to turn the world on its side by saying pro-worker AI, but we hope that more people will give consideration to this model of, hey, is there a good way to do this that would take the existing expertise we have and leverage it and get more out of it with better support?
Next
and
time
if I
you
could
travel,
just say 60 seconds on the question that you raised, Natasha. I mean, non-economic factors matter, especially when you are after a new technology that will do many things in the future that we don't actually have a handle on. The entire AI and even the computer science field from the early on was shaped by very different visions. And the one that became more dominant, especially with AI, is the one of machines, algorithms, and computers replicating, mimicking the human mind. That was the purpose of all of the Dartmouth conference participants, that I thought that was within a few years' reach. And science fiction plus that background has conditioned a lot of people in the industry to think that that's the most natural path for machines to go. And I think that is one path for machines to go. But as David explained very eloquently, it's a very difficult path. And there are many other things that we could do. And I think to the extent that the ideology of the fads and the preoccupations of people, especially powerful people, matter, and we know from many historical experiences and many market circumstances that they do, that vision really pushes towards AGI. The fact that AGI was there and discussed for the last 40 years, even before anybody could think that was a possibility, just is a little indication of that.
next time your travel's disrupted, Natasha, would you rather be helped by a bot? I mean, I don't know whoever says, great, I got through to the bot. B, a person who doesn't know what they're doing or struggles to make changes. Or C, a person with empathy and empowerment with the data and tools. This is the David Autor dream, I think. And that's certainly the kind of people I try to find, certainly the kind of business I try to get when my travel's disrupted. That's what's missing, Natasha. And that's about vision. And if the vision of a corporate sector, particularly a dominant corporate sector like the one in the United States, is automate, 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 then you're going to get a lot of automation. But if the vision is find ways to develop and build technologies that enhance human capabilities and deliver new products and services that you can sell to the world, then you're going to get more of that. And that's going to push up the demand for labor, and you're going to get higher real wages as a result.
So I too wish we had until 9 p.m. But alas, we are approaching the end of our hour. So I want to raise two thoughts and then get you to react to whatever you can and give each of you like a quick last word. One is about, I one point in the conversation, I heard David in response to China Shock talking a little bit about slowing the pace of, and being comfortable in some sense with slowing the pace of innovation to allow there to be more capacity and time for the labor market disruption to be better absorbed over a bit of a longer horizon. And so I was curious if you all could reflect on that in the context of the fact that we're not the only country in the world trying to make advancements in this space really rapidly. And are there some trade-offs that exist between potentially losing an AI arms race to China or anyone else that are relevant to you all? And the second is to reflect a little bit about some of the policy levers. We didn't even get much time to talk about them, and we could do a whole AI and tax panel, I feel like. But to reflect a little bit about some of the policy levers, are there your policy levers really about the technological side, like a pro-worker AI set of policies, or are what you are more in favor of getting better at managing the disruption potential? So better social safety net, better way of taxing capital, trying to develop the capacity to do more, to do better worker training, upskilling, that sort of thing than we do currently in the United States. And
I'll just say one word about China and then leave it to David, I think, on the worker training aspects. I think if China did not exist, Silicon Valley would have had to reinvent it. It's such a boogeyman that helps this sort of AGI agenda. And indeed, if you believe that the world is one of AGI and leading to artificial superintelligence, whoever gets there is going to be the winner take all, there is no room for collaborating with China. But in many other technology areas, China is more advanced than the US. We can learn a lot from China. Actually, Chinese companies are now better than the US ones in implementing robots. I think they're approaching the AI integration into manufacturing much better than the American companies. We have a lot to learn from them. And this sort of AGI craze and the zero-sum framing is actually hurting American businesses. So I think if we move away from AGI to pro-worker AI, it will help our relations with China, and it will help us really kickstart a better agenda for improving manufacturing as well.
You want to go next, David?
No, go ahead, Simon.
Full disclosure, Natasha, the T in MIT stands for technology. So I'm all about science and technology, more of it, but for what purpose? That's the key. And creating more good jobs. That's the bumper sticker, more good jobs. Actually, we do have a hat that we'll send you, designed by David, that says pro-worker AI on it. But more good jobs is another way of saying that. China, people love to talk about it, but this is about us, Natasha. This is about what we create for ourselves, is what matters for us and for our labor market. And I understand the China piece and the geopolitical piece, and Daron has the hat. Thank you, Daron. Well done. I forgot my hat. So more science and technology, accelerate what matters, Natasha, and accelerate what drives the demand for human expertise. And on the policy levers, why can't we have it all? I mean, I didn't hear anything there that's a substitute. So yes, more on redistribution, more on worker training, more on other pieces that David has spoken eloquently about, but also change the direction of technology. And that's where the taxation piece comes in. The capital taxing, making the taxation more symmetric is one potential element, but again, love to have discussed more in terms of encouraging innovation to move in a direction that's less algorithmic intensive and more human intensive, Natasha. But otherwise, changing the direction of technology and these other things to help us cope and react and help workers, all of the above. David?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a period of momentous change, and we should be using all levers available, right? We should certainly be building out our social safety net. We should have wage insurance. We should have universal basic capital that gives people an ownership stake that isn't just vested in their labor. We should, there's no way to slow AI down. So, whether you like it or not, we are definitely in a prisoner's dilemma race. The question is whether we can use it productively. And I think we're missing opportunities. I'm not saying automation is evil. I'm saying there's opportunities to use it to make human expertise more effective. There are just so many domains we're not ready to automate them, but we have it within reach to do what we do better. And so there's potential. This is a great opportunity. We've never had an opportunity to make so much progress on some of our greatest challenges in education, in healthcare, in energy generation, in dealing with disease, poverty, even the climate change. So there's huge upside, there's huge risk. We should be looking for those upsides. We should be attempting to mitigate the risk, and we should be steering it modestly in a direction that we think is going to be socially beneficial to the degree we can.
Well, with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. I will definitely take you up on that hat, Daron, and I look so forward to many continued conversations about this incredibly important area. So thanks to everyone for joining, and thanks to the Hamilton Project for this great policy piece and putting this on this afternoon.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Natasha.
much,
Thank
Natasha.
you.